GCB is muted. I didn't even do it.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. I don't know how that happened. Before we get started, as usual, the views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are not necessarily those of the Sons of Confederate Veterans at GEC. Any division, brigade, camps, or other subsidiaries, strictly those of us expressing them. Hope everybody is having a good week. Normally, Wednesdays are reserved rather for reruns. But this week we've decided to do something special in honor of Confederate Heritage Month. We're going to talk about an event that happened in April, and we have the world famous Michael C. Hardy here with us. He is a author and historian from the Old North State. I'm afraid he might throw something at me if I call him a Tar Heel. I don't know. I've met some that are okay with it, some that aren't.
My family had left North Carolina by about 1790, so I don't know how much tar is on my hills anymore.
Well, you relocated there. Well, you relocated up higher elevation.
Oh yeah.
In Mississippi, we're at or below sea level. What's the tar level like in North Carolina?
My tar level is about 3,800 feet.
Well, good. If y'all watched this last season, Michael was on for a couple of great episodes on Lee and Jackson. But Michael, introduce yourself if you don't mind to everybody who's new. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, all that good stuff, and we'll dive into the topic.
I am, gosh, we could talk a long time, but I'm into Confederate history. I'm into Southern history, and I love researching it, and I love writing about it, and I love talking about it. And as far as further background, I mean, I've been writing for 26 years. I have 24 books published, a lot of articles, over 1,000 blog posts. I have a blog called Looking for the Confederate War. And I've lived here in Western North Carolina since 1995. Grew up in Central Florida and went to school at the University of Alabama. So, and the vast majority of my Confederate ancestors are from Alabama. So I like all Southern states. They're haven't ever been someplace I didn't like. So that's a little bit about me. Crazy. You say famous, it's probably more like infamous to a lot of people out there.
Well, I could say world famous because this past week I was watching TV, and lo and behold, you showed up on there.
That's right.
On a documentary about the Petersburg campaign, which we're going to talk about the close of the Petersburg campaign here in a little bit. What books have you written? You're a noted author, and I know you just got one that just came out because you showed us the author's copy this past Sunday. And before we get started, let me say, everybody go find his Facebook page. He does an amazing historical talk every Sunday at
almost every Sunday.
Almost every Sunday, unless you're out of town or at the observatory.
Yeah.
What time? Because I get confused with hour change.
Well, it's 8:30 Eastern, so it would be 7:30 for y'all folks a little further west of me. So 8:30 Eastern, and sometimes there's a theme to that, and sometimes it's just open season. And I encourage folks to ask questions. And if I can't answer your question, then I will probably research it and turn it into a blog post at some point in the future. Because I've been doing this a long time, but like everybody else, there's a lot that I don't know. As far as books, I'm fascinated by two things. I love regimentals, and I love places. And so, I mean, I've written a history of the 37th North Carolina that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. The 58th North Carolina that was in the Army of Tennessee, the 39th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, which was Lee's bodyguard or his headquarters staff guard, couriers and such. I wrote a book on the Branch Lane Brigade, and I've written about Charlotte, North Carolina in the war, and I'm fascinated with both of those places, regiments and people and the places that they left behind. And I argue for a long time, even though there are probably 70,000 books about the war, we know so little about the places that these men left. We can talk about Gettysburg. We can talk about Robert E. Lee, and we have, and we should continue to. But look at the history in your backyard. How easy is that for people to access? And that's kind of my sermon that I preach is, history should be accessible to people. And that's probably more than you want to hear about that subject tonight, but because we're here to talk about Gettysburg and end of the war.
Well, I was going to say, think locally, act locally, and learn locally.
That's right. And if anybody out there is interested in doing that, drop me a note. I would love to share some of my experiences of doing this for 25, almost 26 years. Maybe I've done something that can save you some time. Researching and writing local history or Confederate history is not all that close to what they teach you in college or at the university. It's a totally different ball game.
So the History Lover's Guide to North Carolina, really quickly.
Yes, that is coming out May 30th. I have a copy of it right here, officially coming out May 30th. A History Lover's Guide to North Carolina. And I was contacted by the History Press, and they asked me if I was interested in doing that. And I said yes. And it covers everything, but just not in a lot of detail. There's like brief paragraphs on, everything from Native Americans to pirates to airplanes. We got the Wright brothers going on the other side of the state. There's a chapter about the war, about World War I, about World War II. And I encourage people to get out and explore these places. We need to be the ones out talking history, sharing history, asking questions, telling people at these historic sites what we like and what we don't like. That's our responsibility. History is right there in your backyard and right there in my backyard. So.
Well, I've got, and Jason and Lloyd just talked about it, and I kind of want to know how's the Feeding the A and B coming out?
I was told that it's in their fall catalog, which that's all I got right now. I've not seen edits or proofs or anything, so I am waiting patiently as well. And I'm really looking forward to that project because it goes a lot of places that are, I think, going to really blow people's minds. Talking about food in the ranks and food with the generals and what they ate and what they didn't eat and boxes from home. And I just love that project. And maybe tomorrow I'll get word on something, but hopefully sometime this fall we'll see that project out, and maybe I'll be out in your backyard or visiting with your camp talking about that. I would, I love getting out and talking about history with people. So speaking of Rich, I'm actually speaking to the camp in Greer, South Carolina tomorrow night. So if any of those folks are on here, here's a shout out to those folks down in the Greer camp.
Well, good. I hope you have safe travels, and I'm going to be honest and selfish for a second. I want Feeding the A and B to come out because I'm trying to work a particular impression reenacting Wise Out, and I imagine that'll save me a lot of research. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you get news really soon. Be a great Christmas present. Any of Michael's books would be great Christmas presents. But tonight we're talking about Fort Gregg, and I'm just gonna kick it over to you and let you run with it, and then jump in when I can.
So in 1864, well, even before then, if we look at the defenses around Petersburg, there are actually two different lines. And one of those lines is called the Dimmick Line. And it is really close to Petersburg. I mean, it's right on the outskirts of the town there, the cockade city. And then in 1864, when Grant's not had any success north of Richmond. I mean, he's lost battles at the Wilderness and Spotsylvania Courthouse and North Anna and Cold Harbor. I mean, all of those are major Union defeats. Grant comes up with this idea that he's going to cross the rivers, the James and the Appomattox, and he's going to very quickly capture Petersburg, which would force the evacuation of Richmond. And he sends some troops down there, and they kind of have a little success, but they kind of get cold feet and don't follow up that initial success. This is in June of 1864. And the Confederate forces, once the war in the East moves to the Petersburg front, they start building other entrenchments. And it's always, since Grant can't take the place by direct assault in 1864, he's constantly working to the west. And he's trying to break the railroads and break the roads and strangle the city of Petersburg. So these lines, not that Dimmick Line right around Petersburg, but the Confederate lines get longer and longer and longer as the Federals move further and further west. And they eventually stretch all the way from the Appomattox River to Burgess Mill. In September of 1864, Wade Hampton, I know we got some folks out there who like Wade Hampton, writes a letter to Robert E. Lee and says, we could use something in between this Confederate line and the Dimmick Line as a fortification that if the first line, that big long line, gets pierced or broken, soldiers can occupy these entrenchments and hold off until we reinforce that Dimmick Line. And so Robert E. Lee agrees, and they start building two forts. One of them is called Fort Gregg, and the other one is called Fort Whitworth. And both of them are named for families who have houses right there in that area. It's not named for General Gregg. As far as I can remember, we don't have a General Whitworth. So, it's named for the families right there in that area. And Fort Gregg, if you've ever seen pictures of it, it's actually crescent shaped. And it does not have a back. There were no fortifications in the back. Instead, the Confederates built this palisade fence across the back. There were cannon emplacements in Fort Gregg, and there was a moat out in front of it. And I'll probably say this again when we get finished, but if you're ever on I-85 going into Petersburg, and you look off to your right, just past the Boynton Plank Road, you can actually see Fort Gregg. It's right there next to the interstate, maybe 100 yards or so off the interstate. So, it's right there. It's very obvious. They picked a group of 100 artillerymen who were drivers for artillery batteries. But since many of these batteries are now stationary in those entrenchments around Petersburg and Richmond, they don't need drivers for the horses. And so they pick 100 of them, and they arm them with rifled muskets. And there are 2 smoothbore Napoleon cannons that belong to Chew's 4th Maryland Artillery Battery that are the permanent garrison of Battery Gray. So for 10 months, Grant tries really hard and fails, for the most part, to pierce those entrenchments that the Confederates have built. But finally, and this is map number 1, finally, on April 1st, 1865, Grant was able to turn Lee's left flank at the Battle of Five Forks. And so on the morning of April 2nd, Grant orders an attack of the entire Confederate line, an assault of the entire Confederate line. And that line is spread dangerously thin. Lee has taken Confederate troops to send to Five Forks to try and shore that area up. They get beat. That's the story of Pickett and his shadbake. I've got one soldier in the 37th North Carolina who writes that he and his comrades were about 10 feet apart, which is an enormous amount of distance. So the Army of the Potomac has massed the 6th Corps under Wright right in front of Lane's brigade. And just a little before daybreak on the morning of April 2nd, 1865, they launched that attack. And that's what that map illustrates, is that attack of the 6th Corps on the Federal lines. So as the Federals are pouring through, no better way to put that, the Confederate lines, there's a lot of disarray, of course. At one point, Lane rallies some of his men, and they actually counterattack and drive the Federals back, but there are just too many Federals for so few Confederates. And Lane falls back. And some of his men go to that inner Dimmick Line, and where Battery 45 is. And some of his men are ordered to go to Fort Gregg. And if you'll pull up map number 2, you can see Fort Gregg there and Fort Whitworth. Sometimes they're called Battery Gregg and Battery Whitworth. And you can see that inner Dimmick Line, and you can see the outer Confederate lines there. Lane's brigade would have been stationed down where Arthur's Swamp is, which is where the attack took place. So some of Lane's men have gone to Battery 45, and some of Lane's men have been ordered into Fort Gregg. And Lane himself is ordered by Cadmus Wilcox to go into Fort Gregg, and Lane doesn't want to be there. Everybody, I can't say everybody, Lane and his adjutant actually write after the war in the series of correspondence that it's an absolute death trap. And they can see that. So Lane finally gets permission to leave Fort Gregg, and he leaves part of his brigade there. Besides the artillerymen that are stationed in the fort, there are members of Harris's Mississippi Brigade, namely the 12th and 16th Mississippi Regiments. And then there are Georgians from Thomas's brigade that are in that fort. Somewhere around 334 men are in Battery or Fort Gregg. And it's not a very big place, but they're all stacked up in there. And their whole job is to hold the Federals off long enough for some of Longstreet's men to get across the river and to reinforce that line, that inner line around Petersburg. So the Federals, about 11 a.m., attack. These are Federal soldiers under they're in the 24th Corps under Major General John Gibbon, and Gibbon has an interesting connection to the story. They're not there at that point in time, but 2 of Gibbon's brothers are actually members of Lane's brigade earlier in the war. One of them is a surgeon, and the other one is a quartermaster, brigade level quartermaster at one point. And Gibbon has actually grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina with his family. Even though he was born in Philadelphia, his dad was a sayer at the U.S. Mint in Charlotte. And so that's one of those divided families. I don't know if the 3 brothers, there's actually a sister who was a nurse and a matron at one of the hospitals in Richmond until they figured out who her older brother was, and they fired her for it. But I don't know if that family ever talked to each other again. I've never figured that out. But Gibbon's men, 24th Corps, mostly men from Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio. I think there's a Maine regiment in there as well. They would launch 3 different attacks against Fort Gregg. Starts about 11 o'clock in the morning. Of course, the breakthrough has occurred much earlier, but the attack on Fort Gregg starts about 11 a.m. And I pulled out 3 short little pieces by some of the men who were Confederates who survived this attack, and I'm going to share those with you. One of them is a Confederate artilleryman. He's a kid, and this day is his first battle, as far as we can tell. He's probably 17 years old, and he's inside the fort. He's new to his job. He's working one of the artillery pieces. And this is what he writes. He writes, quote, "First shot that I fired went over their heads. I served the vent, pulled the lanyard, and I sighted the gun also. My next shot was too low, striking into the ground just outside the fort. I did not know anything about cutting the fuse and never cut it. Third shot I fired, I put in 1 charge of powder and 2 of canister. and I struck them breast high about 300 feet away, and it appeared to me that they were 3 lines deep. This shot produced a beautiful panorama, which is an odd way to put it, but that's what he wrote. It opened them up in style, but they knew they had us and closed in and came on. Their lines were far extended beyond our front, and their wings rapidly formed a half circle around us as we poured into their center. So that's one of those soldiers who writes about the experience that he's having there inside of Fort Gregg. And it's amazing we do have all these accounts, because you don't get a lot of Confederate accounts about those last days of the war. The next soldier whose account that I pulled out is by a lieutenant. His name is Dallas Ringler, and he was in the 37th Regiment, 37th North Carolina. He wrote after the war that the Federals were within, quote, 40 yards, and then we gave them one deadly volley. They then wavered, and the first line gave way. The second came forward and came within 30 yards of the fort. We yelled and fired. They stood a few seconds and then broke and retreated. But then the other lines came to the ditch around the fort. While the firing was in front, one line came in the rear and almost got inside the fort through the door. About 20 men charged them and drove them back. About 11 o'clock, they scaled the walls of the fort, and for several minutes we had hand-to-hand fight. We used the bayonet and killed almost all of them that came over the top. About halfway past 11, they attempted to scale the wall again. We met them with the bayonet, and for several minutes it was one of the most desperate struggles I ever witnessed, but it did not last long. Soon they were all killed or knocked back, and then a deafening shout arose from our boys. Near 12, they tried to force their way through the door in the rear of the fort and succeeded in getting in almost, but we met them with the bayonet and drove them back. This time, the ammunition was almost out, and our men threw bats and rocks at them in the ditch. No ammunition could we get, and about 12, they scaled the walls, and after a short struggle, they took the fort. Some few did fire on us after they got possession, and we surrendered, but their officers tried to stop them. So that's a second account. And if you want to put up that third slide,
Oh, yes, sir.
that would be great. The fourth account, no, only had 2 accounts. Sorry about that. Only 2 accounts. I looked at a third one, but I pulled that one out. So as you can see in this image right here, this is a very famous painting. You'll actually find this on the marker that is at Fort Gregg. That young man right there who has that lanyard of that artillery piece in his hand, kind of a famous part of the war. The Federals have told him that if he dropped the lanyard and surrender, they wouldn't kill him. And he basically told them, shoot and be damned. And he pulled that lanyard and took out a whole bunch of those Federals, and they shot and killed him thereafter. Fort Whitworth falls soon after Fort Gregg. Confederate losses just at Fort Gregg were 57 killed, 243 wounded and captured, and another 33 unwounded. But the sacrifices of these men allowed portions of Longstreet's men, like I said earlier, to filter into the inner lines of the works around Petersburg, stabilizing those lines until Lee could hold out that night and head west toward Appomattox. Battery Gregg. Did Connor lose power?
Yep.
Interesting. So, I mean, that's the attack on Fort Gregg, and it's called, one of the titles of that is called Confederate Alamo. And if you're interested, there's a book by John Fox, who lives up in Winchester, Virginia, called The Confederate Alamo. And a fantastic book, Bloodbath at Petersburg Fort Gregg on April 2nd, 1865. And you can read an account. Of course, it's both Confederate and Union. If you're interested in my book on Branch Lane Brigade that also has accounts of this, you can check that book out as well. Connor, got any questions for me? I think he's froze up. Nope, there he's back.
Probably, I'm guessing his Wi-Fi is going to be out.
I can see him there moving around. Well, Harrison, you got any questions for me?
Oh no, sir, no, sir. I was really loving your talk, and when the sad thing is I had no idea the battle took place, and I tell people a lot of time, my historical education, I'll call it, has went down since going to college. It's gotten much worse because I like time in college just not letting you have the ability to do that.
Right.
And they cut so much stuff out of history, and they cut it out to fit their narrative and cut it out because they honestly just don't care about it. So when I was asking Connor, what you would be talking about, and when he told me, I was like, I've never even heard of that one before. Tell me something about it. And Connor just does at Alamo and then hangs up on me. I called him at work. And I was like, the Confederate Alamo. That automatically sparked my interest because, ironically, I just finished rewatching the Alamo movie that John Wayne stars in.
Right. Great movie.
Yes, sir. I'm a country Western fan. So I went and rewatched it again recently, and I enjoyed it. But yeah, no. So when they made that comparison, it it sparked my interest, and always love hearing from the men's perspective too, the soldiers' perspective.
And I think that's the important part. I mean, we can say we can talk all day long, but it's really what they said and their opinions that matter so much to us 160 some years later. I often say in my works, I try and let the soldiers speak for themselves. I'm just trying to get them in the right place at the right time because a lot of times they don't know that. That they're sometimes remiss about what's going on other parts of the battlefield because they just have their little perspective of the war. And so I really enjoy their accounts and their stories, whether they be written in a letter and diary at that time or, days after, or even their reminiscences written 20, 30, 40 years after the war. So it's great to read their accounts, and it's important that we dig into the things that they wrote and that they said and their opinions. But that's a little bit about Fort Gregg, Battery Gregg. Like I said, if you ever get to the Petersburg area, it's great to visit Petersburg National Park. Pamphlet Park is private, but I mean there are some fantastic trenches. That's a great image of Fort Gregg there. You can see how it's open on the back. You can still see artillery placements there. But that's a spot right there next to the interstate. You'll have to get off, I think, on Boynton Plank Road, and you can actually drive. There's a parking area there at the top of that screen, and they keep it mowed. Try not to walk in the tall grass because the ticks are fierce out there. I mean, just absolutely fierce. So that's a little bit about Fort Gregg. And
hey, Michael, I don't know if y'all realize, but my power went out.
You're fading in and out, Connor.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I'm trying to tell Harrison to check his text messages. I'm trying to send some questions over.
I can't right now. I'm using my phone because my computer died. Or died is the wrong word. It's frying out.
So are the messages on SCV chat? I
got that.
Hey, I didn't know I'd be hosting the show by myself tonight.
Bless your heart, neither did we. One second, Connor. I'm finally pulling everything back up. Connor had to log off because there's tornado sirens going off. Bless his heart.
So I'm looking at questions.
All right, perfect.
Scrolling back to the top. Yes, Jason says, highly recommend visiting Petersburg National Park and Pamphlet Park in the Five Forks area, and I would as well. It's a great place to get out and walk where they were in that time period. David Pope asked, was the 63rd Tennessee involved in Fort Gregg? As far as I know, no, they were not involved in that battle. And not all of Harris's Mississippi regiments were there as well. Just those two that I mentioned, or I'm sorry, Harris's Mississippi Brigade, the 12th and the 16th were the ones that were there. Did the Yanks, Jeff Plummer wants to know, did the Yanks kill unarmed Confederates in the fort? And that is a fantastic question. And I think my next blog post is actually going to be on that. And according to several post-war Confederate writings, yes, they did. There were several Confederates that were killed, shot, bayoneted after after they had surrendered to the federal forces. And that's one of the things that, you know, we hear about Fort Pillow and we hear about Saltville, Virginia, and we hear about Champ Ferguson. We don't hear anything about the Confederates killed at Fort Gregg. We don't really hear anything about the federal colonel, George W. Kirk, killing men in a hospital here in Western North Carolina. Those are stories that are just swept under the rug because, you know, all the Federals were good guys, right?
Oh, yeah. Super good people.
I say that in jest, just in case some people might misconstrue that. My strange sense of humor. So David says that Colonel Fulkerson from Rogersville was captured and became one of the Immortal 600. He would have to be captured a little earlier than April 2nd of 1865 because most of these folks, most of the Immortal 600 had already taken place several months prior. The whole Immortal 600 event had taken place months prior to the capture of the lines below Petersburg and Battery Gregg. And Jason wants to know, were men of the Washington Artillery manning the Napoleon? They actually were manning two of the Napoleons there. No, they were manning one of them. Sorry, manning one of them. The other one was under Colonel True's command. Actually, Jason, I don't know if that's right or not. I know that Captain True had two of his guns there. Jeff wants to know, did Lee train his guns on Fort Gregg? No, he did not. But there were artillery fire going on, Confederate artillery fire going on, trying to take out the Federals in front of the fort as they swept toward the fort to try and capture it. If you've not got a copy of John Fox's book, and I met him, I don't think it was the last time I spoke at the Winchester, Virginia camp, but the time before that, I actually had dinner with him. And great guy, very knowledgeable about the war. So please check out the Confederate Alamo. It's a fantastic book.
Got a question from Connor. Bless his heart. Account from the Confederates actually formed a battle line before the Federal assault and caused some delay in them hitting the fort. Is that true?
Say it again. You cut out about every fourth word.
We're technical issue night here. Connor said, I read one account the Confederates actually formed a battle line before the Federal assault, and that caused some delay in them hitting the fort.
Connor, we'd have to talk about timing because at one point before the assault on Fort Gregg, the Confederates, part of Lane's brigade, actually reformed and charged forward and pushed the Federals back. There were just so many Federals that there were not enough Confederates to reestablish the line. They tried, and that may be the event that you're referring to. If there's another attack, that one does not come to mind right this minute. I'll have to, if I'm wrong about that, I'll have to shoot you a note later when you get out of your basement.
Bless his heart. Poor David's now having technical issues. Now the technical issues are going so far to attack our audience. It's been a special night here.
It has.
Bless your heart, Michael. I think every time you come on, something like this happens.
No, we're good. I don't mind a bit. I mean, I'm just happy that we have this opportunity to chat history with so many folks. There's so much out there to learn and so much out there to share. And I'm grateful and I'm blessed that y'all folks want to chat.
Oh, yes, sir. Well, we always know it's going to be a very good historical episode. Connor also has another question. Bless his heart. I'm pretty sure he's typing this under his bed right now. Second says is I have read accounts where because of the delay that the Confederate soldiers were able to remove some rifled guns out of the fort. And I'm guessing it goes back to his previous question as a well.
That's entirely possible. So much of those last 2 or 3 days, from the attack on Fort Stedman there, the end of March, until April 2nd. I mean, so much is in flux out there along the Confederate lines. You know, the Confederates had attempted to punch through at Fort Stedman, which is far north of where we're talking about this evening. And they did, but just not enough of them to follow up on that attack. And the Federals countered further down the line and captured some of the entrenchments, the picket post and everything out there. And the Confederates were attacked again and drove some of the Federals back. And I mean, it's just back and forth and moving supplies. And I'm sure many of the Confederates at that point in time knew that it was just a matter of days. They were so starved. And that's one of the things I talk about in Feeding the A&V is they were, I mean, after the fall of Wilmington and Cape Fear Riverport, that's where the majority of the supplies feeding the Army of Northern Virginia were coming from. And that fell in early January of 65. And I mean, there's no food whatsoever. And I don't think enough people take that into account. And so many folks just so many of our ancestors, not talking bad about anybody's ancestor, but so many of them just left, just the hunger overcame them after 4 years and they just left. So I'm reading more comments here. Oh, you got that one. Feeding game. Did they have tobacco rations? At times, yes. And at times, no. The food comes and it goes. Sometimes early in the war, they get coffee. And then in late 64, this blockade runner comes into the port of Wilmington loaded with coffee. And a lot of the soldiers are writing home about how they're getting real coffee for the first time in a year. And so they get coffee rations. First part of the war, they got whiskey rations. That was a pretty common thing until, folks that didn't drink would save their ration and give it to the folks who did. And so a third of the regiment is drunk, and that causes all kinds of problems. They got tons of stuff from home, and that's absolutely amazes me what they shipped from various communities. Early in the war, there's this fella, I think, don't quote me on this part, but I think he was in the 5th Alabama, but his aunt is actually shipping him live chickens from Alabama. And she tries it twice, and the first time, none of them make it. And the second time, the chicken coop that she shipped them in arrived, but somebody had stolen all the chickens, or they got out. I can't say they were stolen, but they're not there when he gets there. So she's trying to ship live chickens. Any food that you can think of, from sausage and hams, jellies, jams, honey, possums, raccoons, field peas. I mean, just anything you can think of. When I wrote my first book, I had this soldier who said that he wrote home that he was grateful that the eggs that his wife shipped had arrived. This is from North Carolina. And I'm like, how in the world would you ship? I wouldn't ship eggs today. How in the world would you do that? And I didn't have that answer until I worked on this project, and have a guy who wrote to his wife and asked her to ship eggs and to make sure she packed them in sawdust to keep them from breaking as they traveled. So they're not boiled eggs or anything. They're raw eggs. And so there's a lot of stuff to learn. And I did was a lot of good stuff, a lot of fun. Casey says, did the 10th Virginia Infantry have any involvement in the battle? No, the 10th Virginia was not there during the Battle of Fort Gregg. It's really just those group of Marylanders. It's that artilleryman. It's a few members of Lane's brigade. It is and Harris's Mississippi brigade, those 2 regiments, and then some men from Thomas's brigade. 334 is the number of folks that were there. Maybe 335, because there's actually one man who escaped. Post-war story. He was a member of the 33rd North Carolina, and he had their regiment's flag with him in Fort Gregg, and somebody ordered him out of the fort. And as the post-war story goes, he tucked that flagstaff in his belt and he walked back to Battery 45 while the Yankees were shooting at him. And ever so often he would stop and wave that flag at the Federals, and he just kept right on going. So he's the only person that I have seen that actually escaped the battery, and escaped. As the story goes, he was ordered to leave. It's not like he ran from the fort, but he was ordered to leave. So all kinds of interesting stories.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see here. I think you already were asked this question earlier, but just in case you weren't, I know we talked about it. Let's see. All right, I'm about to mess with my father. So my father was like, I'm definitely going to get you some basically breeding material for this battle. Any other book recommendations other than possibly the ones we already have talked about?
Of course, I will always recommend Douglas Southall Freeman's R.E. Lee and his other set, Lee's Lieutenants. Fabulous books that everybody needs to read. I'm going to look over here on my bookshelf and see. There's A. Wilson Green wrote a book called, I think it's called Breaking the Backbone of the Rebellion. That's really good about that attack at Petersburg, or basically Pamphlet Park. A lot of us, when we write, the Petersburg campaign ends on April 2nd of 1865, and the Appomattox campaign begins on April 2nd of 1865. So, the attack that morning and battery, Fort Gregg and Fort Whitworth, and they pull out, the Confederates pull out that night from both Petersburg and Richmond and head west. That's the start of the Appomattox campaign. We kind of divided up that way. I'm not the only one who does that, but other folks do as well. But Breaking the Backbone of the Rebellion by A. Wilson Green is another good read on that. David's posted that he's reading R.E. Lee right now, and that's one of my favorite books. 4 volumes of it. One of my favorite books. I actually have 2 sets of it. It was originally published in the 30s and the 40s, and I have behind me my reading set that I use all the time, and then I have a case set over there that I don't hardly ever take out of the case. I'm not sure why I have 2 sets of the same book, but I do. Fabulous books. So Lee's Lieutenants is another good read. Breaking the Backbone of the Rebellion, Fox's The Confederate Alamo. Those are probably the ones that I would recommend.
Okay. I know me and you've talked about this, and of course I invited you to come on our Robert E. Lee special.
Right.
Because I knew you were a big Robert E. Lee fan. I'm sure everybody who's ever watched the show has heard me say 1,000 times, I love Robert E. Lee. But fun fact, I haven't actually read R.E. Lee yet. And
it's an investment of time.
Well, I definitely want to put it on my this is about to sound weird because no one my age would say this, but ever since, I've been to college, I started writing down books I want to read for college.
Right.
I put a comment in the chat earlier that, with all the books I have to read for classes and all these different types of things I have to do, I have time to read any in my personal collection other than every while I try to learn something new about the war. Normally it's either on the show or I go to the institute or just chatting with a fellow SCV member. But I made a list of books I wanted to read, and I'm gonna put that to the very, very top. I'm so excited being able to read what I read.
Right.
Because I mostly read Revolutionary War or the War Between the State books, and so I'm very pumped up to start doing that again.
It's great. Maybe we need to have us an official SCV chat book club or something like that at some point in the future.
I have been begging. Now I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I've been begging Connor to do that, something like that, where we just have good books to read, maybe once a month or something like that, without the book and review,
right?
And just book of the week, something like that. I've always wanted to do that, and I put up your website earlier, your second one on your Facebook page, the library link.
Yeah, that's my Library Thing account. And I've got about maybe just over half of my collection cataloged. It's every once in a while, but when I'm in between projects, I'll go pull a shelf full of books and sit down and put them in my library catalog. But at the same time, I think there's like 1,700 books in that catalog. It does not divide series up. So I have all 128 volumes of the official records, but it only listed as one book on my catalog. And I have the Confederate Veteran, the reprint of those, but it's only one book. And same thing with Southern Historical Society papers and Rebellion Record. It's just one book on there. So that may say a little over 1,700, but I just named off another 200 books in those series that are not on there. It's building a library collection takes a lifetime. It really does. And I'm very blessed that, I get to spend most of my days in here surrounded by books and, get to talk to people and everything and chat and recommend books. And not recommend books. And, I had a library friend down the mountain from me send me a note a month ago, asked me about a book. And I told her I hate to talk bad about anybody's book, but it was not good. Just not good book. Well,
I can't wait again. I think it was about last year when I decided, or I recently switched my degree to education.
Right.
I've talked to before. I'm going to be a teacher of history at one lucky high school. If you can call them lucky, I don't know. They might be cursed, but they'll have an SCV member as a history teacher, so at least the kids will get something out of that.
Right.
But I was itching to actually read something and grow my mind, because in college you either get two things. You'll get something that you knew that you didn't know, but at the same time, I wouldn't say it's paranoia, but you've been fed so much false information, and you should do this anyway, I'll admit. But I go back and have to go through multiple sources to be like, okay, was this true? Was this not?
Right.
Historical accounts. And so I can't wait to get my hand on a good history book that I can really sink my teeth into, because it's been long. I've read it's been so long that I've read Lee the last years at least once a semester. Sometimes even more than that. During COVID, I read it. I think I read it 6 times, and I wore it out. Bless its heart. But wait for that. Someone said, Samuel said, after you get your degrees, and yes, I will have to get 2 degrees. Yay. Then my real education begins. Yes, I completely agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
I was blessed to grow up with a good father that taught me good history. But, I think Robert E. Lee said it, that in our lives, now, of course, I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the quote off the top of my head, but in our lives, our quest for education never ends.
Right.
I'm a very young man. I'm 23. So to say that from, I would say Dad started teaching me history in elementary school, started getting down into it in middle school. It's only a couple years where I was able to go, full involved before college hit, and I had to deal with that joy in my life. But I'm so excited to start really learning history again, and I can't tell you guys how much I am going to love that.
It's a lifelong quest. It really is. I've been interested for 39 years, almost 40 years. And I was blessed when I was younger. My parents didn't know a whole lot about history, but they would take me to the library. And I read Freeman, and I read Burke Davis and Clifford Doughty, and even Bruce Catton, who primarily wrote stuff about the Federals. But Bruce Catton could write beautiful prose, and fairly, not so much bias. I mean, you are reading about the Army of the Potomac, but, it just is beautiful writer. And, that's how I grew up, was going to the library and checking out those books and bringing them back and reading them. And I found a quote the other day, and I need to look this up to verify this. So we need to verify this. But Thomas Jefferson supposedly told a young man once, not to take history classes, instead just read a book. So if anybody has a source on that, I was reading a book on Jefferson and Madison by Broadwater. I would love to find that actual quote and get it really, really good.
I want to thank you for bringing up the book club. It got a lot of good comments on that, and that's something we might do now. Along with that was a comment saying, I hope someone hires you. They say these days they probably freeze you out. Yeah, no, it's luckily in Mississippi it's not too bad. But that is definitely a lovely challenge I will have to face in the near future, and a challenge I'm looking forward to.
It would be a challenge here in North Carolina.
It's getting to where it'd be a challenge anywhere.
Right.
So I I'm looking forward to it. I'll say it like that because to say that I'm not well liked at the University of Mississippi's department would be an understatement.
Right.
Ironically, though, one of my professors over the war likes me quite well because I make other kids think.
That's awesome.
It was something I bragged myself about. I had her last semester, and she would let you write anonymous questions on the board. And so I went in as R.E. Davis.
All right.
And would post questions throughout every topic. And I had a blast in that class being able to do that and help people think and have a discussion without getting yelled at. It's a very controlled environment for these historical discussions. Someone said something about Shelby Foote. I discovered Shelby Foote very recently, and I have been slowly diving into his stuff before I read whatever I'm talking about, but the big three books.
Right.
So I'm slowly reading his work, and I have to say I enjoy it very much. Does anybody else have any more questions before we go? Before we sign off for the night? Of course, I want to Mr. Michael C. Hardy for coming on tonight. As always, another great episode. I enjoyed it very much. And now I might be able to actually talk Connor into doing something with a book review. Who knows?
But I would enjoy that. I would absolutely enjoy that. The list of books out there is long, and there's a lot of good stuff. There's even some good new stuff that comes out from time to time. And I love stuff that makes you think. I may not always agree with everything I read. And in fact, I know there's some people when I post books that I'm reading that are going, why the heck is he reading that? But, I want stuff to challenge me. So I have to go out and do more research and think and dig and ponder and say, well, I did read that book. I didn't like it. Here's what I didn't like about it. Or, well, he had some good points. Here's some good points. Here's some points I disagree with. And this is why I disagree with them. So,
oh, yeah. Well, in order to be in a historical conversation, I do believe if you're not reading multiple things of different point of views and stuff like that, you're just going to know one side of the story.
Right.
And as you can see from one side of the story, it's not good. You need to know all the sides and be able to form your own opinions. And of course, at that point, when you're able to form your own opinions and you can kind of get some historical knowledge under your feet, that's when you're ready to start having historical conversations. And I learned a long time ago, pretty easily, because luckily, again, I grew up in the SCV, to never underestimate who can teach you something and what you can learn. And I never underestimate who can teach me something new in history. I was very prideful there for a bit about how much I knew in history. But I would say since getting more involved in the SCV, I realized real quick I was very low on the totem pole. And that's a good thing because that gives me a pole to climb and to learn.
Right.
And so I don't see any more questions. Everybody is thanking you for coming on.
All right.
Casey is asking if Connor is safe. I guess I will call Connor after the show. We usually talk about that business after the show. 50-50. He might be under his bed holding on to a cinder block for dear life. So we will. I will let everybody know how Connor is on the Facebook page. But again, websites are scrolling below. They are also pinned in the chat. So please go support both websites. I did not know about the library website, so I'm going to go look through that after the show. So please go support his website, support his show Sundays. Great show. Hoping now that I'm almost done at the University of Mississippi, that I will be able to have more free time to watch. And so I'm looking forward to starting to tune in. So he has a great show. Support him. Make sure to tune in. Where is it? Yeah, Thursday or tomorrow for your weekly episode of Look Around the Confederation. Same Confederate Times channel. We will have special guest Christian Leon. Me and Christian Lee always talk about something technology-wise and, of course, the future. And that's always very important to keep one eye on the past and one eye on the future. And if you have any camp projects or division projects or any camp events, please email us at scvyouthOutreach@gmail.com and you will be featured on the upcoming episode of Looking Around the Confederation. Without further ado, folks, we're going to sign off. One last time, thank you to world famous now, Mr. Michael C. Hardy, for coming on. And please remember, this is very important, to never Fumar in the elevator and ref rob. Good night, everybody.